Hello and welcome to this bonus little extra video where I'm going to talk about the Omega Edition Hardback Rulebook, which you can get hold of as a PDF. Depending on how things shape up, I might cut to just looking at the PDF rather than the actual physical product. As you can see, it's a high quality hardback rulebook, but before I go into details about this, I just want to cover off some bits from my other videos. Now, I have been reliably informed that the new Onslaught 2 faction, the humans in their pink gloriousness, are actually pronounced Cho-Cho, so the T's are silent. In addition, I think it was the Yoggoth map had a few tokens that I wasn't 100% sure what they were for. Now, apparently they are to play with, for example, the brain cylinder rules on any map. So, for example, let's say you want to play the original core game Earth map, you can place the laboratory token somewhere on the board, and that's the area you can go to make brain cylinders. Similarly, I think there's a token for controlling the fungi and an area that you can mark as, the fungi can't go there, or the mold, I should say. So yes, so I think that covers most of it. There might be a few other bits that I'm forgetting right now that upon review I'm thinking, oh, that's not quite right, or I didn't quite cover that. Anyway, let's get into the book. So, nice cover with the logo of the game, nice and prominent, and a nice Omega Edition bit. Beautiful picture of Great Cthulhu on the back. Nice lighting job there, Mr. Cameraman. Well done. And of course the wonderful Petersen Games logo. So inside we've got a lovely piece of artwork of Cthulhu rising out of the ocean. And then nice big clear fonts telling you about the various pages, which I believe goes all the way up to 172 in this index. Again, this lovely sort of line arty style artwork. I like that as a piece of art. We've then got a lovely quote from Mr. Lovecraft and a sort of story of how the Cthulhu Wars happens. Basically, it's all our fault. We've then got a great summary of the components of the core game. And so that's pretty good. There is, of course, a new rulebook that comes in the new version of the game. Mine is the original Kickstarter one, so it looks slightly different to this. Then a breakdown of the components for each of the core factions. We've then got setup, placing the map, how you set it up for a 2, 3, 4 or 5 player game. And this is the first time I got a little bit upset with the book because I thought it was a new rule book to summarise all of the rules as they stand at the moment. Well, in fact, what it actually is it's all of the separate rule books in one book, but they're not necessarily combined. So, for example, it doesn't tell you in the core book how to play with extra players. That's in a separate part of the book. So that's a slight disappointment to me. I thought they were maybe going to integrate the rules. It's not a big deal. It's just not what I was expecting in my head when I heard about the Omega Rulebook. But I'm very happy with the book. The paper is great quality. The binding seems pretty good. The hardback cover's lovely. It's got great artwork, good imagery. It seems pretty well laid out. So, despite that minor quibble of not being quite what my head had as an expectation, I'm very happy with this. So anyway, let's move on from that. So it's talking about setting up bits. It talks about handing a hint card. Now that is slightly irritating to me because in my first edition Kickstarter, I've actually got the original hint cards, and the turn order there is in a slightly different order to the turn order in the new version of the rules, because from the first to the second edition, effectively, he has slightly tweaked the order of play. I personally think that was an unnecessary step. At the end of the day, it makes very little difference, so it's not worth getting, your knickers in a twist over. Anyway, let's move on from that. Setting up factions comes next. Picking your starting areas, picking the first player. Now, 2 rules that you need to be aware of. If Great Cthulhu is playing, they are always the first player. If Windwalker is playing, they can never be the first player. If you're not playing with Great Cthulhu, you have to come up with a system for picking who goes first. I personally like to take the new plastic Doom tokens, sort of put them in a bag and randomly draw someone out. I don't like going with youngest or oldest player or anything like that. You can pick how you want to do it. I'm not sure, does it talk about youngest player in the rules? Oh no, it talks about going alphabetically. So if you're playing Black Goat, you're going to go before Yellow Sign, for example. That's a perfectly valid option as well. As I say, pick what you want. I love this here. Game basics. Object of the game, have the highest doom and all 6 spell books. And if you want to know more about that, see page 50 for ending and winning the game. So right up front, this is how you win the game. So I like that. Now there is some caveats with that. When we get further into this book, there are some other options available to you to win the game depending on which map you're playing on, for example. So here's where they've changed the order of play. So phases of play, which you can't quite see, the light is bouncing off the slightly glossy page. So there you go. So phase 1 is now the action phase. Then you gather power, then you determine who the first player is, then you do the doom phase, and then you go back round to the action phase. Now that is different from the first edition of the game. Now that's because I believe, if I was I right? Was it gather power came first, then determine first player, then do doom, then do action, and of course they then had to have a little line saying, but skip everything till the action phase on your first turn. So in some ways it's a bit more logical. I don't think it really makes that much difference, but it's a little bit confusing when you're used to how to play it and your hint card has a slightly different phase order. But yeah, as I say, when you actually come to play the game, it makes very little difference, and within about, 5 minutes, we'd all got used to it. So the map is then talked about, and it talks about adjacent areas, which is something you might get caught out with. The North Pacific, for example, and the North Atlantic are considered adjacent, and there's a little kind of colour blob, which you probably can't see in this image, to kind of point that out, and that can catch you out. So have a good look at the map if you've never played the game to be aware of which areas are adjacent. As it also talks about here in the rules, the land and the ocean are considered to be the same effectively for most units. So units can be in the sea, set up gates in the sea, etc. Now there are some units where they are stronger on land or stronger in seas or oceans, and that's something else you need to be aware of. Oceans and seas currently, as far as I'm aware in the game, are considered to be water areas for some units, because some units said, in the ocean they do this, and yet on new maps there are no oceans, there are seas. Now that might become something in the future if Onslaught 3 or Onslaught 4 comes up with some new particular feature or whatever, that might become relevant. But for now, oceans and seas are considered to be the same thing. It then talks about your units, your faction pool, gates, special abilities, the actions that you can take, and there is a little bit about special notes, earning spell books, getting Elder Sign trophies. We tend to refer to them as Elder Signs. Strictly speaking, there are, as it talks about in the rulebook here, they're actually trophies of Elder Signs that have been destroyed, because obviously Elder Signs, sort of in the Cthulhu mythos, are actually something you use to lock down the Great Old One. So strictly speaking, it's Elder Signs you've destroyed rather than actual Elder Signs. It then has a nice bit talking about your faction card. Quite useful to work out how that's all laid out. Then goes into details about the action phase, the 4 types of actions. So you've got common actions, unique actions, spellbook actions, and unlimited actions, and then what the actual common actions are. And then you've got some lovely artwork of the cultist miniature, which is great. Particularly if you're going to paint the minis, you can see maybe what the minis meant to have. So what are the common actions? So you've got a recruit cultist, summon a monster, awaken a great old one, create a gate, move, battle, capture cultist, and they mostly require you to spend 1 power. One of the differences, the create gate actually requires you to spend 3 power. There's a nice picture about the move action, which is great because it's clarified how the move action works, because there was a bit of a debate about, what can you do. Now with moving, you can move, let's say, 8 models at once, but it costs you 1 power per model you move. They don't have to all be in the same area. They don't have to move to the same area. Now, we in my group used to, I think, misread that rule and thought you had to either move into or out of one area. So it's nice to see that's clarified in this rule book. It might be I'm misremembering because, as I say, we haven't played Cthulhu Wars for a while because we've been waiting for all the Onslaught 2 stuff to arrive, and as such we might be misremembering the rules. So it's good to have gone through this rule book with my group and just clarified some bits. What else have we got? So, we've got a nice bit here talking about how to try and avoid capture and stuff, and there are again clarifications of the rules of capturing. So monsters protect you from being captured by monsters, great old ones prevent you from being captured by great old ones. So that's quite good. Then talks about things called unlimited actions, which are control and abandon gates. There is something called unlimited battle that you get when you get 6 spell books, so it talks about that there. It talks about ongoing special abilities, and then it's pretty much done with that. So it then goes into the gather power phase, where you get power based on cultists, gates, and captured cultists. You then obviously might have some special abilities to check out for, and then a nice little feature, minimum power rule. So let's say someone's out there goes and gets 30 power in a turn somehow, and you're on 12 power, well, you basically get a free upgrade to 15 power. So that's nice. Talks about determining the first player, and there's some funkiness with that. There's also some funkiness with the direction of play. You can actually do that. So once you've done that, we then move into the Doom phase, which depending on the map you're playing on can be quite simple or a little bit harder. So you've got everyone gains Doom points, and obviously that's how you're going to win the game. As part of that, you can choose in player order to do what's known as a Ritual of Annihilation, and this is something that in my group sometimes doesn't sit very comfortably because it is sort of a game end trigger, the Ritual of Annihilation. If you do enough Ritual of Annihilations, they get progressively more expensive until eventually you get to what's known as instant death, which can trigger the end of the game. And I actually cheesed a victory yesterday by forcing Rituals of Annihilation to gather Elder Sign tokens and trigger the endgame phase literally on the turn where both of my companions were about to try and trigger, a victory condition for themselves, but I did it in the Ritual of Annihilation phase. They never got to do their turn and basically stole the victory from out underneath them. So I can see why it's in the game, but it's potentially something that can force the game to end a little bit prematurely. But, I'm in two minds about it. I quite like it being there, particularly as I say, yesterday I worked out that I actually could win the game if I got a turn, but the problem was my colleagues were going to force an early victory based on the map we were playing on, so the only way I could stop myself losing was to abuse the Ritual of Annihilation phase. So there are lots of little interesting bits around that, but anyway, let's not get diverted into that. Let's just finish off talking about this. So you spend power, which goes from 5 to 10, you advance the Ritual of Annihilation marker, you get Doom points, and you get Elder Sign trophies if Great Old Ones are in play, and basically that's that. It then talks about the bit I was just talking about, instant death. It's also got a great picture of the Deep One miniature, which looks much better as a picture than a mini. Now, it might be, once you paint up the minis, you get to see some of the detail that's sort of captured in this imagery. And as I say, it doesn't look quite so frog-like in this diagram. So, yeah, the concept isn't too bad. I still would have preferred an upright Deep Old One. Obviously, though, they might have been a bit more fragile there, so there is that problem. Okay, we then got something talking about special events and abilities, which could be map or Old One spellbook derived. Once you've got all through that, obviously you're back into the regular things. So it's then got a breakout bit talking about battle and reminding you there are pre-battle, combat dice rolls, post-battle, then apply battle results. So it goes through those in quite nice detail. And there are 2 results in battle. For those of you who've never played the game, there are what's known as pains and kills. Pains effectively make you run away. Kills obviously kills a unit. And as far as I'm aware, you don't get to pick as the attacker, who dies. You just say, okay, I've got 3 pains, 2 kills, work out who's going to be killed. Now, there are some abilities where you might get to pick that. So be aware of that. You then apply the battle results once you've done all your shenanigans, and basically people die or run away. And there are some rules about running away. So there's quite a few battle examples. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 pages of examples, which should help minimise arguments at the table, because battle can be, ironically, the most complex thing in the game, because it's actually a really simple game. There's just lots of little rule-breaking abilities that you just need to keep tabs on. So, for example, normally I get to pick, I'm going to destroy this unit, but there might be an old one with a spellbook that says, you get to pick who dies, and so you've got to just watch out for those. Anyway, very important. How do you end and win the game? So it's talking about the end conditions. So 30 or more doom will trigger the end of the game. You then work out who's got the most doom and they win, as long as they've got 6 spellbooks. We actually had a game yesterday with 4 players whereby the person who actually won the game only had 5 spellbooks, so they were eliminated. And then the next person, I think, had 43 victory points. I totally misplayed and was nowhere, had hardly any points. It was a dismal game. I think it's because I was spending more time trying to stop one of the other players from winning and remember how to play the rules and explain stuff to people. And as such, I wasn't playing my own game. So it was very pleasing to then win the second game we tried with just 3 players on a new map. Anyway, so lots of stuff there. So the other win condition, straight out of the box, is the Ritual of Annihilation, where you reach instant death. So basically, you go through all that, and as long as you've got 6 spell books, you count up your points, and that is the core game. It's purely based around how many points you've got. Now, some of the new maps have slightly different win conditions, particularly the Dreamlands map, where you've got an instant win condition, which you need to be aware of. It's tricky to pull off, but you can do it. And the rule Omega effectively says there's lots of rules that might be ambiguous, or you might disagree on, or you might not like. Well, you can come up with house rules if you want to. Just make sure people are aware of what they are. We've then got some player tips, so early game, late game. Now, some of these tips are good. Some of them we have a little bit of a debate in our group as to how useful some of them are. But it's talking about how you want to try and acquire a spell book, build up a power base, and have a little bit of an army to protect your cultists. A general trend in our group seems to be you want to build a second gate quickly and summon at least 1 monster unit, preferably 2. I was tempted to try a very aggressive first turn summon a great old one with one of the factions. In the end, I think I did it on turn 2. So all sorts of interesting stuff there. It then talks about how in the late game you've got your great old ones out. You've probably got 3 or 4 spell books, and you've got to work out how to finish off staff. You've probably got enough power to be able to start doing Ritual of Annihilations. I was quite aggressive with abusing the Ritual of Annihilation in our second game. And that's sort of what can keep the game quick, because 3 or 4 turns into the game, you're actually quite a long way into the game. And I'm trying to think, we played 2 games yesterday with a lot of conversation, looking at all the various bits and pieces. And we probably could have played 3 or maybe 4 games if we'd spent a little bit less time on that. But there you go. We then get into the individual factions, so how to play Great Cthulhu, how to defeat Great Cthulhu, a nice little bit of artwork and text. Crawling Chaos, or Nyarlathotep. Shub-Niggurath, the Black Goat. Hasta, the Yellow Sign, and I might be in trouble because I said his name. And then the new 2-player rules. These I haven't really looked at. I'm going to need to have a look at these. These are new to this version of the rulebook. So you can play with the old rules, which were basically you played a 4-player game with 2 players. This seems to be a specialised 2-player game for just one-on-one action. Then we've got the extra stuff, so the additional factions, many of which were Kickstarter extras in the first Onslaught, and of course Onslaught 2. Now, one of my potentially favourite factions, which I haven't actually played yet, is Opener of the Way, or wgah'nagl. So breakdown of the components, tips about how to play them. Again, nice artwork, nice gribbly picture. The Sleeper, which is another one of my new to me factions, which I actually did play yesterday. Totally misplayed it, but I do like the look of it. I can see it being quite fun. Talks about, again, how to play, pretty picture, etc. The Cho-Cho, this is actually the faction I won with yesterday. My other players are absolutely terrified of wgah'nagl, because basically once you summon him, he just starts growing and growing and growing and becoming more and more powerful. Now, even though I won with the Cho-Cho, I didn't enjoy playing with it as much as I did with Tsotho. So I don't know, it's a weird faction. It does seem to be a lot about exploiting these proto-shoggoths and bringing in wgah'nagl. Your high priests are quite important. One of the problems, I ran out of steam at the end of the game because all my high priests had been removed from the board and I just couldn't get them back onto the table. But as I say, I did still manage to win with it. So yeah, interesting faction. Definitely worth a look, and one of the ones from Onslaught 2. We've then got Windwalker, which potentially is a very powerful faction. We did have a little bit of a problem with knowing that it was a powerful faction. For example, in my first game, I spent a lot of time trying to shut down the Windwalker because I was just scared of the power build-up. And unluckily for Windwalker, I think on the turn they were about to explode and win the game, another player triggered the end game phase and ended up actually being the winner. So great picture there of him screaming away with his howl. We then go into the neutral monsters and lots of stuff about them. So the Dreamland monsters, Cosmic Terrors, which I didn't actually get to the table. I was very upset about that. Then Independent Great Old Ones. And basically, it's just a load of pictures. So just to give you an idea of what's out there, I would have liked a little bit more detail about how to use these guys like we did for the faction. Maybe that could be in the Onslaught 3 Omega expansion book, which they're talking about doing. We've then got some nice imagery of how to use your faction old ones as independents. Now, obviously, if you've got the PDF, you can print this out if for some reason you didn't manage to get hold of the actual physical product. So it's good to see that in a nice, clearer detail. Again, it would have been nice maybe to have a little bit of a chat about, oh, well, if that will work really well with this faction or whatever. Another pretty picture and a nice quote about wgah'nagl. And then we get into the mixed and miscellaneous expansion. So we've got Azasoth, and we've got a little bit more detail about him, I'm pleased to see. Then the Ramsey Horrors, the High Priest, who we actually did play with, and I don't know, we had a bit of a mixed opinion. Now, we didn't play with the specialist rules, which are available. We just played with the generic High Priest rules. I actually did abuse the High Priest a few times just to try out some bits, and there was a particularly interesting bit where they thought I couldn't do something, so they did something based on, oh, he doesn't have enough power to do that. I said, okay, in response to you doing that, I'm going to sacrifice my High Priest, get my 2 power, and then I was able to do something they weren't aware I could do. And they were like, oh, yeah, that's a really good use of the High Priest. But yeah, I think the overall opinion was we were maybe expecting them to be a little bit more exciting than they were. But I think they're a nice little addition to the game. I think one of the problems we had is I think they're 3 power to buy, and when you sacrifice them, you get 2 back. We were just wondering if maybe it would have been better if they were 2 power to buy and you got 2 back when you sacrifice them. But, there you go. We've then got the unique High Priest bits, which we're going to have to try out. That might mix things up. I have actually printed out new versions of this, so they're a little bit bigger and therefore easier to read. My only disappointment is that I think the PDF that I've got tries to print them 1 to a page. You can actually fit 2 to a page fairly easily. In fact, if you print out in landscape format, you can probably just about squeeze 3 to a page on A4 paper. So I did actually do that, but there you go. We then got a picture of Azanath, who was in Onslaught 1 as a start player marker, if I remember correctly. Then a little mention of the coloured gates, which we actually use to indicate our starting areas. We didn't play with the colour out of space rules. Again, that's something we might need to try at some stage. The Shining Trapeziodon, we did actually use some of this. For example, we had a player using the desecration markers. I didn't use the trophies because I've already got my 3D printed ones, and definitely want to try out the brain cylinders. The first player marker, I wasn't 100% sure whether I wanted to keep it or not. We played with it yesterday, and yeah, it's quite nice. So HPL might have had a stay of execution. He might be staying in my collection. And then we got the battle dice and the custom dice. So yeah, we did actually use these dice. So I've actually kind of filed them with the relevant factions. Additional maps are then covered, and I'm pleased to say here we get a full description. Now, we did actually play on the Dreamlands map, so it talks about the setup, the tunnels, and this citadel glyph, for the instant win. We did have a lot of fun with that because we had one player trying to deal with a bowl, one player trying to deal with a zoog, and I was just going for the traditional win, which I did actually manage to pull off in the end. Now, we did have a little bit of an incident where the bowl was destroying gates, and there was a slight misunderstanding of how that worked, so apologies to the player who didn't quite get that rules. So make sure you do explain, if you're playing on this map, how it works to everyone's satisfaction. The Library of Selenio, that's talked about here, and this is where I'm interested to try out this map. I do think it's a little bit unattractive, but it looks like it could be interesting to play on. So quite a lot about that. The Primeval map, this is the map I'm most excited about. I really like to try this one out and see how the glaciers work. So yeah, definitely one I want to get back to the table. Beautiful bit of artwork with someone frozen in a glacier, which possibly Cthulhu, the little kind of weird shadowy shape in the ice there. Nice ominous picture. We then got Yuggoth with the tokens I was talking about. So Slime, Lab, Watcher, No Slime. So it's my understanding that these tokens can be used on maps other than the Yuggoth map if you want to bring the rules. I'm hearing the Watcher is unpleasant, and there's a little bit of an interesting debate in my group as to whether we like the AI monsters or not. So it could be interesting to play this map and see if that helps form our opinion. So there's quite a few pages on there. And then what I'm pleased to see, unlike the actual map rulebook, in here they've gone in with lots of extended examples of play, particularly for the Watcher, so that's good to see. Another pretty picture with a quote. It then talks about the 6 to 8 player maps, and there's not too much information about them here, mostly pretty pictures. And then we get a lot of frequently asked questions all compiled together sort of in the back. So core rules, faction rules, and I think we get into maps soon. Oh, neutral spellbooks, neutral monsters, terrors, independent great old ones, unique high priests. Then the additional maps come. Then a nice picture of a brain cylinder, and we're pretty much done. And then some designer notes, which I'm going to have a read of, and then credits. And we end up with a pretty picture. So there you go. So that is the rulebook. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that.